Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Friday, March 15th, 2013. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Getting ready for another relaxing weekend. Maybe not here. We got another big storm on the way in that they're doing flood warnings and all this other stuff about here. Got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Sam is sitting in our control room today, ready to pick up the phone when you call on him with your concerns. And, of course, in hour number 3 today, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us with her unique perspective on what's going on in the world. Now, today, March 15th, is International Day Against Police Brutality. And, of course, the New York Police Department are celebrating by declaring temporary martial law in Flatbush, Brooklyn, as riots continue to grow over the shooting of this young man in the back. And witnesses are saying there was no gun. The gun the cops claimed that this kid has, it's a drop gun. We know police do this. They have an old, untraceable gun on them. They shoot somebody, they put the gun on them and say, he shot at us. Except now we know that gets done, and it's a powder keg over there. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. A reminder, tomorrow, March 16th, is the 10-year anniversary of the murder of Rachel Corrie underneath the treads of an Israeli bulldozer that was demolishing Palestinian homes. The civil case is still dragging through the court system. Justice delayed is justice denied. At every step of the process, Israel's lawyers say continuance, delay, we need more time. They're just going to run it out until Rachel's parents die. No sense of responsibility, no sense of shame. Not at all. Now, I'm going to indulge in one of my periodic rants about the state of the computer industry in this country. Yesterday, after my show was over, my Wi-Fi router failed. Now, I'm not unhappy with that one. It was a Linksys, and I had it for a long time, so I don't have a complaint there. But I want to underscore something. That Linksys router would communicate with every Wi-Fi device I have, which we all sort of assume that's what's supposed to happen. So I go on down to my local computer store and I said, I'd like a new Linksys router. Oh, we don't carry Linksys anymore. We've got the Belkins. All right, give me the Belkin you've got there. No, we don't have those in stock. You know, we only have the one we think most people will buy. You know, freedom of choice has definitely gone out of the door on retail. So I get this Belkin Wi-Fi router, and I'm already kind of leery because they've got USB ports on the back, which doesn't strike me as something I'm ever going to need, and I don't want to have to pay for, and it's adding pointless complexity to an already complex devices. So I bring the Belkin home, and I plug it all in, and 3 hours later, I still can't get it to communicate with all of my Wi-Fi devices. And I'm going out on the net, and I'm seeing all these blogs about how, oh, yeah, the Belkin Wi-Fi, it's got problems communicating with iPod and iPad over WPA2. And I'm looking at all these different little standards, the 808 BIFZIM ComFam Pack version 2 standard, the fact that password length is not standardized, their different implementations have different, and it's just an absolute nightmare. And I finally get to the end of it. I've got this thing talking to all but one of my laptops. And the really weird thing is the laptop that will not work with this Belkin is running the same operating system as another laptop that will. And it just doesn't make any sense. And I'm going on out there, and Belkin is pointing the finger of guilt at Apple, and Apple's pointing the finger back at Belkin. And I actually found a web page at Belkin that said, probably you just ought to run without security. Yeah, what a great idea. After buying a secure Wi-Fi router, just run without the security and all will be well. I'm going to take a break for commercials. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when we come back, and its implications for why our nation is in such dire straits. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I'm talking about my tale of woe over my new Belkin Wi-Fi router. And I'm already missing my old Linksys that I had for all those years because I brought it home and I plugged it in and everything worked. That was it. Everything was working. Set up security, worked with all of my devices. Belkin, 3 hours of my time last night, and I still couldn't get it to work with all the devices. And I'm looking down the list of all the protocols and security this and different encryption that, and it's just this huge long list. Now, a long time ago, in a land called America, we used to have something called the National Bureau of Standards. It's been renamed, and now it's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. The problem is we don't have standards anymore. And I'm not just talking about computers. We ran into this with like video codecs. One of the production companies I worked for many years ago, the Ohana Learning Foundation, was virtually paralyzed because the method of encoding video on this editing system didn't quite match the video codec that was being used over here for our authoring system. And it went on and on and on. And we literally had an entire room full of DVD players to make sure our DVDs would actually work on all the machines, because the DVD standard isn't standard from one machine to the other. We don't have a standards here in the United States anymore. We have a million tiny variations on a theme, supporting a million patents and a million licensing fees, and everybody grabbing their piece of the action. They're waging financial war with each other on our desktops, in our TVs, in our smartphones. And these little variations have clogged up our ability to move our data along smoothly and efficiently. And that costs time. That 3 hours that I spent on this problem last night is time that I was not working on my website, not prepping for this show, not writing on this book I'm trying to get done, not spending time even with my wife. It was completely unproductive time that got me nothing at all. I'm sure the poor quality of this product made the people at Belkin a few extra pennies, but it didn't do me any good at all. So I have a message out there to the money junkies. I know it is an article of faith that you are just hopelessly attached to. That the reason America, the 99% are becoming poorer and poorer, is we're just lazy. We just don't want to do any work. Actually, we do. We're working as hard as we can. We just can't get any work done. In the money junkies' haste to put a few extra pennies in the pockets, they have crippled this nation's productivity by selling all these tools that we need to do our jobs, and they don't work. We're spending more time making the tools work than using the tools to get real work done, work that we could sell, export. Whether it's planned obsolescence or just cutting the corners and saying we'll let the customers find the problems, it's transferring the burden to the American people. And we're working very hard dealing with that. But because we are paralyzed by these systems, we're not getting work done that could lead to profitability. We're not lazy. We've never worked as hard as we can. But we're crippled with these poor quality tools. And it's not just us. Because the money junkie attitude has infected every part of our economy, including our weapons systems that were supposed to be the best in the world. F-22 is still asphyxiating its pilots. F-35 is grounded. Even when it wasn't grounded, they had problems. The naval variant won't land on a carrier. They put the arrestor hook in the wrong location. It still gets electronics malfunction if it gets rained on. Pentagon just issued a report. It's not going to hold its own in a dogfight against any of the contemporary Russian jets that are being put out there. So you money junkies made this situation where this nation cannot compete productively with the rest of the world, and is very well going to lose this war you think is going to solve all your problems. And by the way, it's not just weapons and computers. Another Carnival ship, the Legend, is in trouble. That's 4 in 2 months. We have gone down too far this path of let's cut some corners to maximize profitability and keep those stockholders happy. Our nation is being torn apart. It is fracturing and fragmenting. It's grinding to a halt. It's being killed by money junkie greed. Going to go to the phones here. Tony from Connecticut. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Wanted to ask you about North Dakota. They have their own state-owned bank, if I understand it correctly, and I understand their economy is doing very well in North Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to know if it is tied in to the Federal Reserve System. What is the difference? Because it seems to be part and parcel, apart from most other state banks. You have an answer for that, Mike?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. Now, obviously, because North Dakota is part of the United States of America, they are, under the legal tender laws, required to transact all business using Federal Reserve notes. So on that level, they are still tangled up with the Federal Reserve. The reason the state bank is working for North Dakota better than private banking is that the State Bank of North Dakota is being run with an idea to what is best for the state, making sure the economy is working rather than private profit going into the pockets of the bank's owners. And even that little difference is enough to significantly alter the economy of North Dakota and the quality of life up there in North Dakota. It's about halfway to the best solution, which is for every state to have a state bank, for the U.S. government to have a state bank and go back to a value-based currency. But even that partial step by North Dakota is obviously showing and underscoring what is wrong with the private central banking model.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, Mike, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of what you talked about Iceland, kind of kicking the bankers out and kind of doing their own thing. And I don't know why more states don't follow that model. Seeing that...
Well, because bankers are very, very generous campaign donors. That's it.
I got you. That's what it comes down to. They're all, they're pimps, and they're buying pay for politicians, and that's how the whole game works.
That's exactly how it works. That is why our nation fought a revolution to be free of that very style of banking, and then our own politicians turned around and 3 times sold us back into that slavery.
Well, Mike, I thank you for that. I was uncertain as to what the difference was, but you kind of nailed it for me, so I wanted to thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you very much there. Now, yesterday I was talking about this conversation I had with my wife about human compassion and why most people seem to have it and some don't. And I speculated that maybe people who are very compassionate are so because they have suffered harm or injury or felt a lot of pain earlier in their life. And that leads them to identify with pain when they see it in others. And that people born to very privileged lifestyles, they inherit a lot of money, or they become successful very, very early in life, or they marry into money, are not compassionate because they literally can't see it. Well, it turns out I may be wrong about that, because over at the Corbett Report, they had a very interesting article, Reflections on Political Ponerology. And basically they're talking about the concept of successful psychopaths. And what they mean by that is the unsuccessful psychopaths are the violent serial killers. Ted Bundy, that kind of thing. Successful psychopaths are those who are still psychopaths, but they seem to function within society, or at least they create that illusion. People like Stalin, Pol Pot, Dick Cheney, Rockefeller, Kissinger, Bill Clinton, Donald Rumsfeld. And they have this word, the pathocracy. They're basically saying 4 to 6% of the human population is physiologically unable to feel empathy. It's a defect. Their brain is broken. They can't feel empathy or altruism. They're emotionless, selfish, cold, calculating, devoid of any moral and ethical standards. Yet, they are intelligent, charming, driven, focused, and they tend to achieve high positions of power because they're utterly, coldly ruthless. And basically the article is, any hierarchical power structure is going to become dominated by these sociopaths, which we've already known. And I think one of the reasons that the Founding Fathers set up the nation the way they did, with 3 branches of government keeping an eye on each other, was they recognized that power attracts the very sort of personality that should never be allowed to have it. Now, they didn't have the words psychopath or sociopath or any understanding of mental illness, but just observations with their own eyes. and the history of Europe showed this to be true. And so they wanted to create a government where even if somebody with these tendencies got into power, their ability to cause harm to the nation was held in check by the other branches of government. Obviously, we have moved away from that, and it's another argument against this idea of large empires or global government, that the way to hold these sociopaths in check from harming the entire planet is to have a planet with 1,000 little tiny nations, so that even if one of these nations is under the control of a psychological monster, and 4 to 6% of them will be, in theory, they can't do that much damage. But one of my biggest arguments against a global government is, sooner or later, there'll be another Hitler. And then what do you do when there's no place else on earth that can stand up to them and say, you shouldn't do that? We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha America, welcome back to the show. And just taking a quick look at the stock market, there was a very large drop at the opening bell, and then the magic elves over at the Plunge Protection team were starting to massage the market for its traditional Friday happy ending. But it looks like they may be falling short. Now, there's still a couple more hours to go on it. But the markets are in the red, not decisively so. It's not time to jump out of windows or anything like that. But we've seen it all the time. They always want the markets to end in the green on Friday, so everybody goes home happy and stops thinking about the obvious signs that the economy is in serious, serious trouble. Now, I want to talk a little bit here about what's been going on over in Brooklyn, specifically in Flatbush. Now, it is a high-crime area. There's a lot of tension, a lot of racial tension that is in the area. And there was this very tragic shooting where a young man was shot by the police who insisted he had pulled a gun on them. And then the autopsy came back showing that this kid had been shot in the back. And there are questions whether or not that gun that the police claimed was in fact planted by the police themselves. And we know that that goes on all the time. Now, what is really kind of an interesting aspect of this is that up until just this last day, this story was mostly existing on social media, in the independent media, here in the blogosphere. And the corporate media wasn't really paying a lot of attention to it. But there's been like 3 going on 4 days of riots in Brooklyn. And the media was off looking at all these other things that were going on here, being conditized. And I think the reason is because following Benghazi, they saw all these spontaneous riots spread across the entire Mideast. And I think the concern is the entire American nation has been pushed to the breaking point. And rioting in one city could easily spark riots in other cities. And it could. It absolutely could. But it's very interesting that because of the coverage on the independent media, the social media, the corporate media is finally having to deal with this. And they're taking the official line, oh, the kid had it coming, he had a gun, the police would never, ever, ever lie to us about anything that important, blah, 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 blah. But the hostility is definitely there. They're describing Brooklyn as a powder keg over at Business Insider, and they're absolutely right. This riot, if this shooting had happened in a healthy, productive economy where we had some sense of confidence that our government was being truthful with us and the corporate media was being truthful with us and the money junkies weren't just looting the place with wild, reckless abandon, it would be tragic. There'd be a couple of peaceful marches and that would be the end of it. The violence is a symptom of just how angry Americans are getting. And so the officers shot this 16-year-old kid, total of 7 times, 3 times in the back. And the witnesses are saying they didn't see a gun. His mother just made a statement saying, no, he didn't own a gun. He wasn't that kind of kid. And so they're screaming racism, racism, racism. And it's an ugly, ugly situation. So the New York Police Department has declared a portion of Flatbush, sort of the core of this whole thing, a frozen zone. That is the new euphemism for martial law. In other words, the media are not allowed in. They don't want the media talking to anybody who actually saw what happened. And if you are in this frozen zone, and you are given an order by the police and you refuse to obey it, you can be arrested. It's martial law. Now, the last time the New York Police Department declared a frozen zone was on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, and I did see that when I was there in New York for that. And, of course, during Occupy Wall Street. They're creating these frozen zones to keep the media out so they're not going to see what the cops are doing, and to basically allow the police to act in an unconstitutional manner. Because the police are not allowed to give you arbitrary orders unless you are committing an actual crime, at which point you can be arrested. So the story is getting a lot of coverage out here in the blogosphere, and the corporate media is finally having to pay attention to it because everybody knows what's going on. We saw the same thing back during the aftermath of the invasion of Iraq when the Downing Street memo surfaced that confirmed the propaganda was being engineered around an existing agenda to invade Iraq. And it was big news here on the blogosphere for about a month. And when it reached enough people, the corporate media finally had to say, yeah, there was this memo that kind of made it sound like that we were lying to start the war. So the corporate media is reacting to us, which means we here in the independent media and the social media, meaning you, the American people, have the initiative in the war for the minds of America. The government and the corporate media lost the initiative, which means they've lost this war. It's a turning point. It really is. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the economy when we're coming back from this next break. Apparently now Obama is telling Democrats it's time to make concessions on entitlement programs, even though it's not really their money. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about Obama now telling Democrats they have to make concessions on entitlement programs. I hate that word, entitlement. They're trying to spin that this is a gift from the generous government. And it isn't. It's your money. Now, earlier in the week, Obama was making some very strange statements. He was saying he wasn't going to balance the budget just for the sake of a balanced budget. Can you imagine an ordinary homeowner saying that? I'm not going to balance my budget just so I can say I have a balanced budget. Let's go further into debt. Let's spend with wild, reckless abandon. It works for the federal government and the money junkie banks. And then Obama came out and said that his priority is not to balance the budget, but to grow the economy, to expand the economy. And we understand, in the context of an economy that is based on a privately owned central bank issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest, to grow or expand the economy means to drive the people deeper into debt. Okay? And then yesterday, Obama came out with another statement that there really wasn't a debt problem after all. This, after all, the grandstanding and the table pounding and the screaming and shaking the fists at the rafters of the Congress over sequestration and all the bad things that were going to happen. There really isn't a debt problem. Well, apparently, the American people didn't buy any of that. And so Obama is talking about, actually he was asking yesterday, the House Democrats to make entitlement concessions to the Republicans to reach a deal to reduce the deficit. Now, as I said before, that's not really the government's money, especially Social Security. That is a separate deduction from your paychecks to go into a government trust fund. The government's job is to invest that money, generate a profit, and use that money to help you through your retirement. That's the deal. The government has borrowed all of that money out of the Social Security Trust Fund, and now they can't pay it back, is really what it comes down to. They're defaulting on the American people. As far as the other entitlements, there is a certain contract of honor, or should be, between the American people and the government. If we're told we must pay taxes for good roads, good schools, good hospitals, Medicare, education, then that's what the money should be spent on. When the government is taking taxes, promising they're going to have good roads, good schools, blah, 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 and then that money is taken for other purposes, that is usurpation. The government does not own that money. You do. And you give it to the government with the express understanding the government will spend it on the things you want it spent on. That's what taxation with representation was all about. When the government takes those taxes, and they're raising taxes as fast as they can, and they take those taxes on the promise that they will care for the nation and its people, and they turn around and they spend the money propping up Wall Street banks to just under $1 trillion a year is what the cost of that is now. Trillions more for wars, trillions for Israel. That's usurpation, and that's taxation without representation. We are right back in exactly the same economic circumstances that led to the American Revolution. A private central bank issuing the public currencies alone at interest, taxation without representation, usurpation of the public wealth. We're there. We are there. And Obama is going to cave into the Republicans to come up with some kind of a deal, and the deal is always going to be the same thing. You, the American people, have to make do with less so they can have more. You want to reduce the deficit? It's all made up numbers anyway on a balance sheet. It's all paper money. Just write it off. You can do that. Iceland did. We can write it off as odious debt because our tax money is not being spent on us, the taxpayer. It's all make-believe. It's all make-believe economics. And they could reduce the deficit, they could reduce the debt, they could write it off. It's being used to control you and rule you, and it works only so long as you believe that there is something real to this concept of debt-based currency and usury. As long as you believe it's the only way to run the nation's economy. And we know from history that is not true. This nation was started with a very different economic system, and it worked for the people and the nation. And the money junkies hate that. They hated it back there in 1776. They hate it when Gaddafi was doing it in Libya. They hated it when Chavez was doing it in Venezuela. They want one world under a fascist private central bank to permanently enslave the people of planet Earth with unpayable debt. White House is now talking about new cuts to Medicare. Because after all, they've now mandated you must buy your health insurance. So why should the government spend any of your tax money on health care? And the United States really does have the worst of both worlds. If you go to a country like, well, France, or any of the European countries, or at least this is the way it was before this whole money junkie European Central Bank thing became the disaster that it was, the missing 11th marble. These other countries do have high taxes. But you get stuff for the taxes. You get the good roads, the good schools, the good hospitals. You get your medical care paid for. You get your free college education. You get value back for your tax money. Here in the United States of America, you're still paying some of the highest taxes in the world. But you still have to pay for your own higher education and go into debt to the money junkies to get that, and then find there are no jobs like you were promised. You have to pay for your own health care, and it's the most expensive health care on earth, and something like 33rd in quality. So we're paying the high taxes that you would pay in a nation that takes care of the people, and we're seeing the government saying, look, you're on your own. We're going to cut Medicare. You've got to pay for your own medical services. We've got to spend the money propping up our financial industry. Wall Street needs that money more than you do. So your mother has cancer. That doesn't matter. We've got to protect Goldman Sachs and all the rest of that. Times are very hard in this country. Unless you're a money junkie or you're working for the money junkies. During this lunch that they had for Obama, the Republicans were serving lobster. The economy is in the Al-Qaeda. Now federal workers are starting to lose their jobs because of the sequestration. The retail supply chain is collapsing. And our leaders are feasting on lobster. Boy, isn't life just grand. Now, a little story coming out of Wonga. This is one of these payday loan companies. And apparently, they have a major problem in that they've been issuing loans to identity thieves. They're not doing any kind of due diligence. Somebody comes in and says, hi, this is who I am. I've got a piece of paper that says, this is who I am. Here's my bank account numbers and everything. Loan me some money. Then they skip with the money, and Wonga seizes the bank accounts of the person whose identity was stolen. And there is now an investigation taking place, and so far Wonga is stonewalling, which is starting to sound like they knew they were giving the money to the wrong people and didn't really care, because then they could turn around and go after the person whose identity was stolen for the loan, the interest, penalties, service charges, all this other stuff that Bill Shaw was talking about yesterday. The financial industry is not about taking care of the community or the people or the nation. It's about looting the people and the community and the nation to enrich themselves, and it always has been. That's why I keep saying having private bankers in charge of the nation's economy makes about as much sense as having drug addicts in charge of the pharmacies. Now, earlier in the week, we were talking about this inquiry coming out of Great Britain into LIBOR, and how Bank of England executive Paul Tucker told members of Parliament that Barclays' abuse of the LIBOR system was only one tiny part of the bank's dishonesty over crucial financial information, and said you've got to start looking at other numbers and other markets that are being manipulated. And it's starting to look like this is at least a major part of the manipulation, the rigging of the gold and silver prices, in order to arbitrarily declare gold and silver prices to a point where ordinary investors will not desert the stock market to invest in metals, to keep the gold and silver prices down while the central banks start buying bullion to replace what went missing from the New York Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, and the Bank of France. They don't want to have to buy back all that gold at a fair market price. And it turns out that the silver and gold fix, they call it the fix is in, is set up with a conference call between a handful of these big banks exactly the same way LIBOR was doing. And this story is actually getting some traction, again, because it's carried here on the independent media. And you're not going to see this one on the corporate media for a while. I can guarantee you about that one. But when it finally comes out that the price of gold and silver is being rigged, artificially suppressed, confirmed, and they're forced to stop doing it, that's when gold and silver are really going to explode upward. There'll be a run on gold for physical delivery, and all of these brokerages that have oversold these paper delivery contracts are going to be stuck. J.P. Morgan was doing it with silver. We know the gold brokerages were doing it with these gold paper contracts, and then having to lease gold from the central banks to make good on the contracts when they came due. It's a gigantic fraud. The whole thing is a system of fraud. And you know something? We need to start asking an important question. Is this massive fraud in the global banking system, the global investment industry, is it really a new thing? Or is it only just now becoming visible because of the excesses, the failures, and the independent and social media reporting these stories to each other? Because again, the LIBOR rigging didn't make it onto the corporate media until it was already big news here in the independent media. It reaches a point where so many people know about a scandal, the corporate media has to cover it so they don't look like they're trying to cover it up. So they're responding to us here. Article out of Blacklisted News, 17 signs that a full-blown economic depression is raging across southern Europe. Will it spread to the United States? Yeah, that's what globalism does. Globalism tears down the safety barriers between economies. National borders are financial borders, or should be. And these financial borders serve the same function for planet Earth that fireproof doors do in a building or watertight bulkheads do in a ship. They contain problems. So if you have a fire in one office, the fireproof doors are shut. The building as a whole remains standing, especially if it has a steel frame. If you spring a leak in the boat, one compartment might flood, but the ship as a whole keeps floating. If you prop open those fire doors and the waterproof doors in the bulkhead so that you can move around the ship and the building faster, it looks like things are running more smoothly until that first fire or that first leak. And then you lose the building, you lose the ship, and in the economic sense, you lose the planet. This push for globalism is what turned the United States mortgage-backed security fraud from a national problem to a global calamity. And still they're pushing for more of it. They want all the barriers taken down so they can run around the planet at light speed, siphoning off every single penny they can. And they have set the stage for a global financial collapse, which is going to have one positive side to it. If you go back and you look at that article I wrote, All Wars Are Banker Wars, anytime one nation tries to get rid of its private central bank, the other nations enslaved to private central banks will make war on them. Just like back in 1811, the U.S. Congress voted not to renew the charter for the First Bank of the United States of America. The next year, Britain, under the control of their private central bank, the Bank of England, invades the United States. But if the whole system comes down at the same time, all these private central banks will be wiped out together. All nations of the world will be free of their predatory behavior. And every nation on earth should rise from the ashes with the very first rule carved in granite: no more private central banks. And it literally will be a new age for humankind. As the European economy struggles under massive debt and staggering unemployment, they're at record levels. They're finally beginning to realize there is no 11th marble. They're starting to talk about no nation in Europe can actually pay off the debt it owes to the central bank. Well, duh, we've been telling you that all along. They're not calling it the 11th marble, but they're starting to basically describe it. There isn't enough money in existence to pay off all the debt in existence. And they're acting like it's a new revelation. If it is, then these are some very stupid people who've been calling the shots over there. And still the corporate media is waving signs and banners. Oh, the stock market is up, the stock market is up. That's a sign the economy is doing great. No, it isn't. Very, very few people are participating in these stock markets. It's the domain of the money junkies and the 1%ers. For the other 99% of us, we have no stocks or very few stocks. It's not a significant part of our wealth. So a soaring stock market that's gamed up into the stratosphere isn't really a sign of a healthy economy when you're talking about the economy of the nation as a whole. And that's what we should be talking about. Not just how good it is for the money junkies and the stock brokerages and the banks. That's not America. America is teachers and carpenters and bricklayers. And they're not doing very well at all. I'm going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And one of our members over at whatreallyhappened.com just posted a member story. Remember I was talking about this lunch with the lobster, Obama and the Republicans? Apparently Obama did not eat because his presidential food taster was not there. Oh, my, doesn't even trust the members of Congress. That's a seriously paranoid guy right now, and maybe he's got reason to be. Ah, that is just funny here. Now, getting back to more serious things. Again, over in Europe, and this is a story coming out of The Independent in Great Britain. EU leaders are urging Angela Merkel and David Cameron to start ditching austerity to stop cuts to social programs and government spending, because they're looking at the reality across Europe. Right now there's a political vacuum in Italy. There are riots in Spain and Greece, and it looks like Britain and France are going back into recession. And they're starting to recognize there is a growing popular anger all over the European Union at this policy of curing recession with austerity. And this anger is uniting all the people of Europe into a unit, far more than the declaration of the European Union and that flag with the stars ever did. They're sick and tired of hearing, you must make do with less so we can have more. So Europe has been pushed to the brink here. Now, back here in the United States of America, we're still looking at the aftermath of Obamacare. Somebody sent me a picture of the original Obamacare document sitting on a chair, and next to it a pile of all of the resulting legislation and rules and regulations that have come out of it, and it just towers to the ceilings. And it's a mess, and nobody can figure it out. But we're getting this story. This is coming out of Ex-Republic TV, basically talking about a study. The early analysis is that 98% of current individual insurance plans violate Obamacare. And, you know, they're talking about a 40% tax on these things. You must go out and buy health insurance. We decree it. And, by the way, we're going to tax you 40% on it. Now, down in Venezuela, Venezuela is in play. They're coming up on their elections. And already we're seeing Israel is in there, trying to get their guy in. And apparently the anti-Chavez minority, the people who were being exploited by the CIA for the failed coup d'etat a while back, is saying their candidate in the upcoming elections has met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and says if Israel will help him win the elections in Venezuela, they will reestablish ties and be friends to Israel forever. Meaning they want Israel to steal the election for him. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And now over in Israel, speaking of Benjamin Netanyahu, he has finally managed to form his coalition government. It's not really an all-inclusive government. Apparently, none of the ultra-Orthodox political parties were brought into it. This is only the third time since 1977 that they have been excluded entirely from the governing coalition. But Netanyahu was desperate. He wanted to have this happen before Obama shows up next week. And so he's got his coalition that he's going to pull together, and we'll see what's going to happen from then. One of the first things they're doing, of course, is they're starting to ramp up the calls for Jonathan Pollard's release. Now remember, Jonathan Pollard was an Israeli spy who stole American nuclear deterrent secrets and sold them to Israel. Israel then turned around and traded those secrets to the Soviet Union in exchange for increased immigration quotas for Jews to come to Israel. Some friend, right? Now, my parents' generation paid $5 trillion for America's nuclear deterrent. And that was back when $1 trillion was really a lot of money. It's not like today where trillion here, trillion there, so you're talking some real money. Had the United States and the Soviet Union gone to nuclear war after that betrayal, the United States would have lost. That is the scale of that betrayal. Now, Pollard should have been shot or electrocuted, the way the Rosenbergs were, for giving the secrets of the nuclear bomb to the Soviet Union. But he was thrown in jail. He's hanging out there with Bernie Madoff. And there are all these Israel firsters saying, he's a good boy. Really, he's suffered enough for his, you know, it wasn't that big a deal. Yeah, it was a big deal. It was a very big deal. And if you have this attitude that spies from Israel should be given some kind of leniency because they're from Israel, You're going to get more Israeli spies. Remember, in the weeks leading up to 9/11, the FBI uncovered the largest foreign spy ring in American history run by Israel inside this country. And it was linked in with the interception of text messages to police drug enforcers. That information was then given to these Israeli ecstasy traffickers so that they could evade being arrested or raided. And it was huge. And then 9/11 happened. And remember, the only people actually arrested near the World Trade Towers turned out to be Mossad agents. Remember the dancing Israelis? They're cheering and high-fiving, and they're just, yes, what a wonderful thing we've done. And Carl Cameron's 4-part news story on the Israeli spy ring included a quote from a U.S. government official that there was evidence linking those arrested Mossad agents to 9/11, but that evidence had been classified by the United States government. And then these arrested Israeli spies that supposedly had a link to 9/11 were very quietly sent back to Israel, where they're treated like celebrities. They were getting TV appearances and everything. Big hero. And if you treat foreign spies like that, you're going to get more of those foreign spies. Now, I understand Obama, when he's over there in Israel, is going to have dinner with Miss Israel on his visit. Very gorgeous woman, but then he's the president. He deserves the best honey trap of all. Will the Mossad have video cameras in the bedroom? Of course they will. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the corporate media is going on and on about a member of Congress named Portman, Republican, used to be staunch anti-gay marriage. Now he's switched around and he's saying he's okay with it, and he's admitted his own son is gay. Well, that's good. That's going to change your opinion here. But they're waving gay marriage at us again to get us all in a lather about that. Normally you only see this kind of creation of an issue in the run-up to an election campaign, but we're starting to see it almost now as a continuum, which is telling us there's a lot of stuff going on the corporate media does not want to tell us. They're contentizing us here. Apparently, according to Bloomberg.com, President Obama is preparing to tell all federal agencies that they should consider the impact on global warming before approving any new projects, whether it's a pipeline or a highway. How will this impact global warming? Well, all highways radiate heat. They're dark objects. They absorb light. They produce more heat. Highways do, warm the region a little bit. But we are in, lost count how many record-setting winters here. Some 13 years after the carbon Nazis were telling us snow is going to be a thing of the past, and Obama is still pounding on this thing, raising on a busted flush. Has nothing to do with the federal agencies. He's going to pass a carbon tax because he needs your money. And he's going to use this fraud to do it. All right, going to grab a phone call. Scott in Virginia. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Listen, I got a kick out of the Obama's food taster story. If I was the food taster, I would have saved my sick day for next week when Obama goes to Israel.
Oh, I'm sure he's being dragged along to Israel. Apparently, I know that Obama, when he's flying around on Air Force One, they have their own supply of food in the airplane and a cook to cook Obama's meals. He doesn't actually eat the meals that are prepared by the nations and governments he's visiting. They just bring in this little plate for Obama himself. And so that's getting a little bit out there. And between that and his still flogging the global warming thing, I'm starting to think that, yes, Obama is on SSRIs, and that is a very dangerous situation.
I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know if you knew about it, but it just came up about that GOP luncheon.
Yes.
That Rand Paul's food taster is in the hospital, and Lindsey Graham's food taster died on the spot.
Oh, come on. Come on.
According to the Onion Network.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, yeah, that would certainly wake everybody up. But it is. And yes, poisonings are a fact of history. We were talking the other day about why drinking cups made out of horn were so popular with medieval royalty, and that's because if cyanide or arsenic were in what you were drinking, it would discolor the horn and give it away immediately, that you ought not to be drinking that. But I think of the idea of a food taster, that's something like out of ancient history. And now to find one now, and it's not really going to work because somebody who knows you've got a food taster, they're going to put a poison in there that maybe takes a week to kill you. Like polonium-210 or something like that.
You're right. In fact, I wanted to mention something. The reason I called was I heard you reading about the emails accusing you of really being hard on Catholics over this pedophilia thing going on in the Catholic Church, and never hearing you speak about Jewish rabbis. And the thing that got me, you don't need anybody to stick up for you, but the thing that gets me is there's only 13 million Jews in the world. Okay, there's 1.2 billion Catholics.
Yes.
Now, if they both have the same rate of this problem of kids being molested, you should hear at least 100 cases of this problem with Catholic priests for every one case of a rabbi. And then you add into the fact that it's a Jewish-owned media. How the heck is Mike Rivero supposed to know about all this stuff? It's not like you're on their...
We have ways of getting this information. And for all you Catholics listening to this show, I got a Baptist up there on the front page today. Baptist minister got caught with, and in his case, let's cut him a little slack. It was a girl, not a little boy. It was a little girl, underage, and he took her across state lines for sexual purposes. So I'm not just picking on the Catholics. I'm picking on all of them.
And on another quick subject, I sent you that dollar design.
Yes, I love that.
I think it would be great to have a contest on your website to see who can come up with for the new dollar design once we kill this Federal Reserve Central Bank.
Well, I've already got my design up there for the electro. It says along the bottom is we learned our lesson. We trust nobody. So, but that's a good idea. All right, so if you're a designer, this is impromptu. There's not going to be. I'll tell you what. The best design, I'll send him a coffee mug. If you want to design the new currency for the new America, just go ahead. We probably get some really good ideas for that, and I'll put up a notice at whatreallyhappened.com a little later in the day. And yeah, it'll be fun. We'll have a little contest here. Design the new American currency and see what people can come up with.
Some funny ones.
Oh yeah. We're not seriously designing the new currency here, so let's have some fun with it.
And I think any new currency we have, because we know this federal bank is going to end. There's no way that it can continue. Any new currency, I hope we make each currency a history lesson on why we should never ever go back to a private central bank again.
That would definitely
people will
be
see it every day.
A very, very good idea. And I remember many, many years ago when I was very young, and I had my grandmother on my father's side was living in Canada, and she was sending me, $1, $2, $5 Canadian bills, and years later she was very surprised to find out I'd kept them all. And back then, the new Canadian currency isn't like this, but back then the reverse side was these magnificent engraved scenes of Canada. And it was absolutely beautiful to look at. And I could imagine the Canadians would look at the currency and they just couldn't help but feel proud about how beautiful their country was. And maybe we need to find some way of making room between all the anti-counterfeiting and machine-readable components here to fit in something that we're going to feel proud about. And I'm sorry, but pictures of old dead presidents doesn't do it for me. And, let's find the things we are proud of, like the moon landing, okay? And I know I'm going to get calls on that screaming that they're fake. Or some of our great engineering achievements, the things that represent all of America and not just the privileged ruling class. So it's certainly an interesting thing to think about, and I like the idea. I'm going to announce the contest on my website after today's radio show and just see what people come up with. What should the new currency of the United States look like, understanding that the currency is only going to be a claim check for something of value? silver, gold, gasoline, electricity, tons of rice. We don't know, but it's not going to be a reserve currency. So that's the only rule for the new designs here. Okay?
That's a good idea, Mike. And I would say I'd caution you on the Apollo idea, because you know we're a nation of consensus, and you might end up with the front of that bill having Stanley Kubrick's face on it. And you don't want that to happen.
Well, Stanley was a nice guy. You know, he was very pleasant to work with. Okay?
Thanks a lot, Mike.
All right. I have one bone to pick with Stanley Kubrick, and that was Eyes Wide Shut. Because how can you take a movie filled with absolutely beautiful, full frontal naked babes and still make it boring? Anyway, here. Getting back here to the gun grabber situation. We're seeing over in JTA.org how now America's Jewish groups are demanding action on gun control. Rabbi David Saperstein, the director of the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism, said his group is assembling a coalition that is going to act. You've got to take the guns away from the anti-Semites. That's what's coming on. Everybody screaming for gun control are the ones who realize that when the backlash happens, it may be targeted at them. Because that's what happened in Germany. And unfortunately, when you have a backlash, a lot of innocent people get targeted who don't deserve it. But one of the realities we all have to confront right now is that for decades, Israel has been trying to blur the line between the actions of their government and the world's Jewish people. That's why they keep saying, you know, criticism of Israel's government is anti-Semitism. We represent all the world's Jewish people. And they've said it so often and so long, a lot of people do believe it. And so when this backlash against Israel's influence on our government and the Rothschilds' influence on our banking system and economy finally explodes, people are going to be ready to believe, yeah, it's really all the world's Jewish people. And it isn't. But Israel's been selling that idea as a political defense for way, way too long, and we're going to have to work to counter that, because while we are just in seeking out the guilty for punishment as a deterrent to future crime, as we value that Constitution that we're going to preserve into the new nation, we have to be equally vigilant that we protect the innocent. A little common sense kind of an approach here, or we're just going to start that whole cycle all over again, and we really don't want to do that here. The reality is, though, that the post-Sandy Hook gun control push is an epic fail. They're still out there trying to find some way to salvage this situation, but this has blown up in the gun grabber's face big time. More about that when we come back from these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, even as Obama is trying to figure out some way to disarm the American people, because we can't be trusted with guns, he's still out there flinging these drones all over the planet. A United Nations report has concluded drone strikes into Pakistan are a violation of its national sovereignty. In other words, the United States does not have any kind of a legal justification to fly drones into anybody else's country without their permission. And Pakistani officials are adamant. They do not consent to this. They are opposed to it. The U.S. does not have permission to be flying their drones into Pakistan. And the United Nations is basically saying, yeah, this is a violation of Pakistan's sovereignty. Obviously, this is going to apply everywhere else these drones are going into. And we're getting this story here that, this is out of Politico.com, that Obama's claim for justification for the drone strikes is a deliberate misreading of international law. Now, Obama's whole case for the drone strikes is we're fighting terrorists who are non-uniformed. They're not lined up in a nice row to make it easy. We have to go in and we have to strike the suspects wherever they are, because it's a war on terror. But the actual international law regarding this kind of conflict is The only enemies that are legally targetable are those directly participating in hostilities against the United States or performing a continuous combat function with armed groups targeting the United States. Not every member of Al-Qaeda or, quote, associated forces, end quote, meets that criteria. Cooks, dishwashers, doctors aiding Al-Qaeda might be members of Al-Qaeda, but they're not lawfully targetable. And that's an important distinction, because they're hitting these terror suspects, Al-Qaeda suspects. And they're hitting people who aren't actually doing anything. If you think about it, Al-Qaeda in that part of the world may be considered as normal and acceptable as the Republicans or Democrats in the United States of America. And how would you feel about another country sending in drones over our borders and bombing a member of the GOP who is a cook, a dishwasher, a school teacher, not engaged in an actual combat operation against the government that sent that drone in? That's what's going on under international law, and now the United Nations is agreeing. These drone strikes are illegal. Now, the U.S. government is making a big deal over the fact that Iran once again was trying to chase a Predator drone. They're claiming this was in international airspace. We really don't know. Iran may have been chasing the Predator out of Iranian airspace, because I think it would be a little foolish to presume that the U.S. has sent a drone all the way up to the border of Iran and then just sort of hovers there for a while and turns around and comes back home. Now, it's interesting in that there were no gunshots fired this time. The last time Iran tried to shoot the Predator down, they couldn't hit it. Targeting radar couldn't get a lock on it. This time, the Iranian F-4 jet got within 16 miles of the Predator to find the Predator was being escorted by a pair of American military aircraft. U.S. won't say what the escorts were. But if the drones are now being escorted by warplanes, doesn't that kind of undermine the whole point of the drone, which was to wage war without risk to human lives? And I was watching this on the corporate media, and I saw some guy with a bunch of colored ribbons all over his coat was trying to say that Iran was impeding intelligence gathering. Yeah. Don't all nations usually try to keep spies out of their country? I mean, I know the U.S. government turns a blind eye to Israel's spies, but that's not a reason to assume Iran ought to do the same thing with the U.S. And given that the United Nations has found that drones are a violation of Pakistan's sovereignty, the same has to apply to Iran. The U.S. is violating Iran's sovereignty sending drones in, even if they're not blowing people up. So, latest poll over in Great Britain, this is being reported in The Guardian. More than half of all Britons now think the Iraq invasion was wrong. 22% of the respondents say Tony Blair should be tried as a war criminal. Now, over in Korea, things are starting to ramp up. Apparently, North Korea test-fired some short-range missiles off their coast. Corporate media is making a big deal about it. They're test-firing rockets! Yeah, wouldn't you if it looks like you're about to be invaded? I think the real news is these rockets actually worked for a refreshing change, given Korea's path. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Danny in South Carolina. Aloha, Danny. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I rise in opposition to our representatives who have presented this bill, Senate Bill 462, which is presently in the Foreign Relations Committee. It is the Enhanced Israel Cooperation with the United States Act of 2013. I believe they kicked it off during AIPAC, right after the AIPAC meeting. Mm-hmm. Section 9 of the bill, the whole thing stinks, but Section 9 of the bill says that Section 217 of the Immigration and Nationality Act is amended. And what it boils down to is an attempt, if this is passed, to add Israel to the list of nations whose citizens can enter the United States without a prearranged visa, meaning they go to the airport, they get stamped, and they come on in.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with
we've talked about it. It's basically, and especially after all these Israeli spies that we've had all these problems with, I mean, it's just another open door for Israelis to come in, do what they're going to do, and leave. And yeah, it's a giveaway. I mean, this whole bill is basically giving our nation to Israel. One of the things I find most objectionable to this bill is it gives Israel the right to send the United States to war.
Yes. Yes, and we have to pay for everything, and they've added to the list of things we pay for. And one angle to this, which I'm going to admit, this is really out there. I mean, but everything else you've talked about today is out there. I mean, in recent months, I was looking for a job, and I've encountered a number of employment consultants. So apparently, a lot of corporations now don't hire people direct; they send you to another company. And these other companies, very often, at least the three of them that I checked, they're suspiciously Israeli connected. Now,
yeah.
This is, like I said, maybe it's a reach, and maybe I'm getting too far down the rabbit hole, but it looks to me like Israelis are going to have an easy time getting the preferential jobs when they get here.
Yo, you're kidding. I mean, let's be honest. We've seen that in the financial sector. We've certainly seen it in the media. Yeah, you know, one of the ways we've been bamboozled our entire lives is we're constantly being told, be careful you don't discriminate against Mexicans, be careful you don't discriminate against women, be careful you don't discriminate against gays, be careful you don't discriminate against the blacks. And we're so obsessed with not discriminating against others, we're not paying attention to it when we ourselves are being discriminated against.
And then let me tell you the stuff that these so-called employment consultants put you through. They want to know everything. They want to know, you know, friends, relatives going back 20 years, addresses, all of that. I mean, I've gone through security checks before. It's basically a government security check is what it is.
Yes.
But the sad thing is, if they decide they don't want to hire you, you never hear from them again, and there's no explanation given. So this gives them pretty much a free hand.
Yeah.
I mean, in my own paranoid thinking anyway, it's something that really needs to be brought out. It needs to be discussed in the open, but I don't know how to do that because talk show radio won't let me talk about it.
Well, we just let you talk about it.
Well,
and it's a reality, and you know, it's let's be very honest. There's a lot of bias and discrimination going on. Again, as I said, in the film and television media industry, in advertising. I saw it in advertising, and the idea is, if you call attention to it, they accuse you of being a racist, to throw it back onto you. But I'm not in that industry anymore, and I don't care if I ever work in that industry evermore. So I'm going to say, yeah, I saw a lot of that going on.
Well, there's this one more little note I'll put in the back of your mind. Tex Mars did a 1-hour live interview last night. And he discussed, during the last 20 minutes, he discussed the latest DNA study to come out of Johns Hopkins. I believe it was released back in December.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that they've proven upside down, backwards, and sideways that these Israelis, 90% of these Israelis, have no right of return, that God did not promise the land to them because they did not come from there.
Yeah, the Ashkenazis. They're the descendants of Central Asian Khazars. And we did post that article at whatreallyhappened.com, and I got the usual flood of nasty emails saying, no, their methodology was wrong. They're anti-Semitic scientists. They're really secretly in cahoots with the Nazis, and we've got this thing over here. And I said, look in a mirror. Look at that lily white skin the Ashkenazis have, and it makes it very obvious they are not the descendants of anybody in the Middle East. You know, the Rivero line is of Sephardic origin. I actually have more Israelite blood in me than Benjamin Netanyahu does.
Actually, the study revealed that the Palestinians, if anybody has a chance of claiming to be from there, the Palestinians have it hands down.
Yeah, they do. They've been living there for 2,000 to 3,000 years. And that's why Israel's always trying to claim there's no such thing as Palestinians. It's a made-up thing. There was, the land without a people for the people without a land. And we've gone back and documented, yes, there was a Palestine there. There were Palestinians there. They had industry, they had culture, they had art. And Israel has, gone to great lengths to try and skew and distort history and archaeology to keep on claiming that it's supposed to be their land. We've seen all these frauds that have come out, like the temple staff pomegranate ornament that everyone screamed was proof the first temple had really existed. That turned out to be a fake. Then they had the Jehoash tablet, which supposedly documented repair work done to the first temple. And everyone's saying, aha, we have proof the first temple really did exist and we were here. That one turned out to be a fake. And we go ahead.
I was just going to say, Michael, this last study does in fact mention three of the previous four that I'm familiar with, and it does discuss them, and it does tie them all together, and it seems fairly irrefutable to me that they've got it together. That land belongs. God promised it to the Palestinians.
God promised it to the 12 tribes of Israel that came out of Egypt with Moses. Now, we're talking mythology here, but let's just go with it a little bit. The tribe of Benjamin got wiped out later on. But again, you're absolutely right. These descendants of converts to Judaism in Central Asia don't have that claim. They absolutely don't. I think this is a silly claim anyway. I mean, like I said, Rivero's a Sephardic name. I have Israelite blood in me, a small amount there. Technically, I would qualify for Israel's right of return, and apparently now Spain is passing one. If you're the descendant of the Sephardic Jews, you can go into Spain without question, which might be a nice place when the mushrooms start sprouting here in the United States of America. But I would never presume to go over to Palestine and tell the people, look, my ancestors came from here in 70 AD, please get off. That's not appropriate behavior. The example I like to use about how silly all of this is goes back to the American Civil War. My ancestors on my mother's side operated one of the stations in the Underground Railroad, helping escaped slaves escape through the northern states, which would return escaped slaves to the south, even though they didn't approve of slavery, until they could get to Canada, where they would be safe. Canada did not recognize slavery, would not return escaped slaves. And the station that my ancestors ran was 2 days from the border. The slaves would stay in the hidden room that night. The next night they'd be in another home. The next night after that they'd be in Canada and safe. Now, what would happen if I went up to Canada today and I found the descendants of those escaped slaves that my ancestors helped, and I said, you owe me $5 each because my ancestors helped your ancestors? They'd laugh me off the front porch, and they would be right to do so. Because I was not alive back at the time of the Civil War. I had nothing to do with the Underground Railroad. Had I been alive at the time, yeah, I would have helped, and gladly. But I can't take credit for that. I wasn't there. And so this idea of, modern-day Germans feeling guilty because of what the Nazis did, and the Ashkenazi Jews from Khazaria saying, give us this land because it was promised to us by the imaginary playmate in the sky, it's all politics, and it's all deception. And it's being used to justify Israel doing to Palestine exactly what Adolf Hitler did to Poland and France. Just walk in and take it over for their own use.
Well, that's the sad truth of it, Michael. I don't know what to do about it, but it looks like they're coming this way.
Well, one of the first things we can do is to start getting people to stop relying on their beliefs to make these decisions in the world. Thomas Jefferson said, highest duty is to keep yourself fully informed so you can make good choices. A belief is not information. Belief exists in the absence of information. And Israel is successfully exploiting the beliefs of Christians in the United States with this hoax that they are the inheritors of the biblical Israelites, and therefore you must always support Israel's right to Palestine and blah, 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 blah. And a lot of Christians are getting suckered into this thing, and they're going along with it because they're saying in the back of their head, if we can help Israel set fire to the planet, Jesus is going to come down and invite us up to the big house when it's all over. And it is. They're enslaved by their religious beliefs to serve a foreign master.
Yeah, I know that, Michael. Listen, you're doing a great job, man. I love this show. Keep it up.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and switch over to Carlos in Canada. Carlos, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind today? You're on the air.
Hey, Mike, how you doing? I've been listening to your show just recently. I've been on your website a lot. I like the articles you have out there. Very informative. I like the fact that you have different news feeds from around the world, so it's not just from one area. But I read this stuff, and I'm like, how can people not wake up? Like, I've been, my father escaped to Chile because of the coup back in '73. We've been in Canada ever since. And my dad always told me to educate myself, read between the lines, just go think outside the tank. Like, don't be a sheep. You know what I mean? Don't be following stuff. And as a kid, I've been reading stuff, and the more I see stuff, I mean, history tends to repeat itself.
That's what's wrong with history.
That. It is. And people just always, people always ask questions. I've been listening. How did the Germans go along with it? Well, it's, because no one stood up. And then by the time something happens, it's too late. It's you can't do anything about it. It's like people complain about the government, but you ask them, did you vote? No, they didn't vote. So then how can you expect to make a change if you're just watching from the sidelines? You got to get dressed, put on a jersey, and jump in the game. You got to make that, when it counts, go in there and do something about it. You can't just do anything from the sides. Now,
let me give you the count. Let me pause you for a minute. I'm not going to hang up on you, but let me pause you for a minute. There's a couple of counter arguments. First of all, a lot of the population, especially those who are dependent on government paychecks, are in a willful state of denial. They don't want to believe the government is acting evil. Think of a home where the father is beating his children every night just because he likes to beat children. And the children aren't going to see the father as bad because they're dependent on him. So children in an abusive relationship tend to take the blame and fault onto themselves. Wives in an abusive relationship will take the blame onto themselves. Oh, I must have done something to deserve this, because otherwise it threatens their sense of confidence in that dependency relationship. And I think that's why the U.S. government is trying to get so many people on food stamps. As far as voting, I know the conventional wisdom is get out there and vote. I don't know what the situation is up in Canada, but here in the United States of America, the elections are completely fraudulent right now. And this last election, a lot of people just stayed home because they know their vote really doesn't matter any longer. I know a lot of Republicans stayed home because they were angry over the ouster of Ron Paul. And the GOP went down to defeat, and you thought they would have learned their lesson in 2008 not to defy their own rank and file, but they made the same mistake twice in a row. They got the same result twice in a row.
Right. I know, I see where you're coming from. I'm just saying it for the fact that I have a lot of friends here in Canada where they don't vote. And, it's different up here, but the fact is that some people just don't do anything about it, don't get involved. For me, I try to talk to everybody about what's going on, just because, the more I talk to people, I get feedback from other people, the more I learn. Because I might say something, and someone says, wait a minute, you kind of got it wrong. It's this way. I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it, right? So the more you talk about it and you talk to, get informed, you're going to learn a lot. That's why I like listening to your news. I like reading stuff. I go on different websites a lot. Here's the other question I have for you. History. Isn't history meant to, I love history, but isn't history meant to be studied, questioned? We learn about, Canadian history, the Battle of, you name it. We can say, okay, this many people died. How come we can't question certain things of history like the Holocaust? Or, we never hear about the Armenian Massacre. Or anyone who questions the 9/11, exactly what's going on. Like, there's so many holes in that, yet when you try to question it, you're considered, crazy because you're a conspiracy theorist. But, if story
let me come in there. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're running out of time on this segment here. What we call history, what is presented to us as history in the schools, is merely the archive of the propaganda that worked in times past. And we have come to understand that a large part of history is fraudulent and deceptive, like the Spanish mine in Havana Harbor is a good example. Now, if that past propaganda is no longer germane, that's the history that gets re-examined. For example, when divers went down to the Lusitania and confirmed that, yes, indeed, it was carrying war munitions and was therefore a legitimate target for the Germans. Back then when it happened, everyone's screaming, oh, innocent passenger ship, oh, the horror, war with Germany. But nobody really cares in the political sense if it comes out that the Lusitania was a hoax and a fraud perpetrated on the American people, because it was carrying war munitions. But there are some cover-ups and propaganda that are still very much supporting the current political structure, such as the myth of the Holocaust supporting the State of Israel, and that's why it is so protected. There are still people in power who would lose their power and their wealth and their privilege if the truth came out. They're still trying to protect the Pearl Harbor, although as most of those players continue to depart this life, it's now coming out. Yeah, Roosevelt knew the Japanese were coming. He not only knew they were coming, he had goaded them into it, and it was presented to the American people as a surprise attack to get us into war. What's important to understand, of course, about the current age with the independent media and the blogosphere is the lifespan of those lies is shrinking. It took 30 years after the Kennedy assassination to reach the point where half of America didn't believe the Warren Commission report. Here we had the war in Iraq and the claim about weapons of mass destruction. The lie became known to the general public before the war was even over, and that is an historical first. So I'd like to see in the future more respect for truth and history by our institutions, but the people who get into these positions of power and authority, they have a motive to lie and no moral reason not to. Got to let you go. Got a commercial break. Back with another phone call after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Dan the Man is now in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble. We're going to take a phone call here. Art in Philadelphia. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, thank you for taking my call. One of the previous callers mentioned one of the impacts he felt by the outsourcing. There's a direct consequence to you guys in Hawaii. You know about your island of Lanai being bought out, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's now wholly owned.
By who?
I don't remember his name. One of the money junkies. One of the money junkies.
His name is Larry Ellison, the Chief Executive Officer of Oracle.
Ah, that's right. I remember now. Now, you need to understand something. You need to understand something. Kauai was pretty much privately owned before, so it's not like he acquired land that belonged to the public. Kauai's always been kind of privately owned, and you know, it's not a real tourist destination. It's kind of a retreat for the ultra rich, you know, to go and have weddings and parties and not be seen by the paparazzi.
Right. It's also becoming another state of Israel. His co-CEO, Safari Katz, is a dual American-Israeli citizen. The way Oracle got rich was during the Clinton administration. They had a fundraiser in the Silicon Valley fundraiser at the end of Clinton's term. Newt Gingrich went out there. Newt Gingrich was going after Clinton for Monica Lewinsky, and Larry Ellison said, give us unlimited H-1B visa immigration.
Okay.
And the consequence of that is he destroyed millions of American jobs, and he buys the island of Lanai, and it gets mailed about a month before that for the General Services Administration for contract fraud, which he did the same thing with the state of California 10 years earlier. So, and until we get some enforcement and demand enforcement, these criminals are going to keep on destroying American jobs.
That's what it comes down to. I mean, every time there's another scandal or another crisis, Congress says, we must have new laws. No, the problem is you didn't enforce the laws that were already there. Everything the Wall Street money junkies did back in 2008 with the mortgage-backed security fraud is already illegal. And the U.S. government said, oh, we can't arrest them. The bankers are special and precious. We've returned to a medieval society where the rich nobility are allowed to break the laws that you and I would go to jail for violating.
I just heard this, that, I don't know if you heard this also on the topic of sequestering. Did you hear that the armed services, all of them, have a 20% pay cut as a result of that?
No, I didn't hear that. And, you know, for some of those officers, big deal. The officers live very good. And I know that because when I was still working on Lost, one of the locations that we used was the house of the commander of the Pacific Submarine Forces. And it was palatial. So they're doing okay. I don't think a 20% pay cut's going to hit them. But for your rank and file soldiers, airmen, and sailors, yeah, it's going to be a real kick in the teeth.
At the same time, they cut out the tuition payments for all.
That's right.
all
They
new
canceled the
courses.
tuition payments, and yeah,
Right.
it's.
Right.
And again, whether you agree with these wars or not, we as a nation do in fact owe a debt of honor to our people in uniform to take care of them for their service to the country, as misguided as that service may have been. And to see the government basically treat these service people the way they're treating the rest of America, I think they're digging their own grave. Going to take a break for station identification. We'll be back with the Lady Claire after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And for those of you on Justin TV, this gorgeous creature behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who joins us every Friday afternoon for her unique point of view. And before we go into your stories, I just got to comment on this, because we were talking earlier about how Obama is now saying no federal contracts will be approved without first evaluating how they'll impact global warming. And so there's this article somebody just sent me from CTV News asking if climate change could cause polar bears to go from white to brown. Didn't they say that all the polar bears were going to drown? Dead floating polar bear there, doesn't matter what color the fur is. Actually, the reason polar bear fur is white is it's actually hollow. And that's why polar bears float. They don't drown. They can go to sleep in the ocean and not sink. It's nonsense. It's more of that thing. Another record-setting winter, and they're still saying, oh, global warming, global warming, global warming, carbon tax, carbon tax. And then they want you to do the Sieg Heil to the global environmental authority they're trying to sell us. Isn't it amazing how stupid they think you all are as you're digging your way out of one of the worst winters in recent memory? And they actually believe that if the corporate media shouts global warming at you long enough that you will believe it. They really think you are that stupid. It's very angry. All right, Claire, what is first of all on your agenda?
Well, as we know, honey, next week, President Obama will be visiting Israel.
Quick, lock the White House.
And there are several things that I would like to talk about relative to this. But the first is that there is going to be an inordinate amount of Israeli pressure for President Obama to release Jonathan Pollard.
I think we ought to release him. You know, let's let that trapdoor on the bottom of the gallows go and release him down about 13 feet.
That kind of release.
Okay.
Because my understanding is that what he did was compromised the lives of American agents. And what happened was that the information was going through Israel to the old Soviet Union in exchange for visas for Russian Jews to be able to make aliyah or immigrate to Israel.
This is our friend in the Middle East who was doing this.
Yeah.
It wasn't just compromising the lives of our assets in the Soviet Union. He compromised America's entire nuclear deterrent. Had the U.S. and the Soviet Union gone to a nuclear war after that, the U.S. would have lost because of the information Pollard sold to Israel, and Israel then gave to the Soviet Union. That is the scale of the betrayal.
Yeah.
But I think it's an illustration of just how much power Israel has over our government that Pollard wasn't executed the way the Rosenbergs were, and that they're still seriously, you know, every 6 months, regular clockwork, yeah, we should release Pollard. And then, of course, everybody in America says, what, are you out of your mind?
Yes.
This guy should have been put up against a wall and shot twice, where it hurts real bad.
Yes, I think that Israelis need to come to the understanding that they are very fortunate that he was not executed by the U.S. government, and leave it at that.
Okay, absolutely. And next on your list was?
Next, I'd like to talk about a statement made by an Israeli general. Major General Aviv Kochavi told a security conference in the coastal town of Herzliya that Assad is stepping up his offensive against rebels trying to oust him, and that Assad is making advanced preparations for the use of chemical weapons against his own people, but has not yet given the order to deploy. And my response to my memo to Major General Aviv Kochavi and the IDF and the Israeli government: could you possibly be screaming more loudly to the world that Israel is planning a chemical false flag attack to be blamed on Syria as the pretext for an outright invasion. I mean, come on, guys.
Well, we already know that Israel is moving more of their forces to both the Syrian and Lebanese borders.
Yes.
We know that because of this kidnapping by the hired mercenaries of the UN peacekeepers, the UN has now pulled all the peacekeepers out of the Golan and left the gate wide open for an Israeli invasion. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we ran that right up to the bell there at that last one. But obviously, we're again seeing the saber-rattling, got to go into Syria, got to topple the evil Assad. The Iranian press is reporting that as near as they can tell, the hired mercenary army is already crumbling. A lot of them are leaving to go home. They've had enough of this stuff. We were talking about how the Netherlands was increasing their state of terror alert out of concern that their citizens who were fighting for the hired mercenary armies and are now coming home more radicalized than before. So it looks like it's kind of an all-or-nothing situation. And again, they're back to, chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction. Like we haven't been hearing that for months on end without seeing it. Remember all the talk about chemicals and germs and nuclear weapons leading up to the invasion of Iraq. They're still screaming about Iran is getting ready to build a nuclear bomb. They have been saying that same thing for 33 years now. That Iran was on the verge of a nuclear bomb.
And Michael, with regard to that, Obama gave an exclusive interview to an Israeli television station, and he said in this interview that Iran is a year away from a nuclear bomb.
And this time we really, 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 really mean it.
And so he stated, right now we think it would take over a year or so for Iran to actually develop a nuclear weapon, but obviously we don't want to cut it too close. So when I'm consulting with Bibi, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as I have over the last several years on the issue, my message to him will be the same as before. If we can resolve it diplomatically, that is a more lasting solution. But if not, I continue to keep all options on the table. And I cannot believe that he said this in public, because what he has just done, Michael, is to have completely dismissed the assessment of his own intelligence director, James Clapper, who stated earlier this week unequivocally that Tehran still has not decided whether to pursue militarization of its nuclear program.
Well, it even goes further than that, because there was that other report that came out that said that Iran could not have a nuclear weapons program without being detected.
Right.
And I was commenting on this earlier in the week that under its new leadership, the IAEA is very much biased and pro-Israel and pro-war on Iran, but they've never found any actual evidence. So they're starting to take this posture of, well, we can't find any evidence it's a nuclear bomb program. They just must be hiding it that much more cleverly. We know. Miss Cleo told us. We got it on the Ouija board. The tea leaves say that Iran has a nuclear weapons program, but every time the IAEA says that we think they have a nuclear bomb program and we can't find it, the IAEA is basically admitting they can't do their job, or they're not doing their job. They're complete failure. Let's fire them and save the money.
Absolutely. And the way that Obama said this, with an absolutely straight face, I am sure, makes me very much wonder if these people are not making all of this up as they go along. Because it's obvious that he has just dismissed what Clapper said last Tuesday.
Well, they are just making it up as they go along. And the real problem, and we've commented on this before, the propaganda is now being created basically on an ad hoc basis as they need it. Oh, what do we say? Get out the propaganda dartboard. Weapons of mass destruction. Aiding Al-Qaeda. The problem is, of course, the sum of all the propaganda together is not consistent. It doesn't have a central storyline that is being supported. It's scattered, it's diffused. Filmmakers call it losing the narrative.
Yes. And
every time they throw out another one of these trial balloons to see if they can get traction, the net result is, as the public sees all these contradictory trial balloons coming out, their confidence in anything the government is saying, of course, continues to plummet. And the government doesn't see it. They apparently are still absolutely convinced that the American people are gullible, loyal, trusting morons who will believe anything that box full of wires and lights tells them.
Yeah. And the very bizarre thing with President Obama having made this statement If the president's people other than James Clapper know this for a fact, why did James Clapper, in his testimony to Congress, not know it? It makes absolutely no sense, Michael.
Well, I think at this point the reality is Iran is not building nuclear weapons. They historically do not invade other countries. They haven't done it in 200 years. It's the U.S. and Israel that are constantly invading under any excuse they can come up with. Oh, terrorism, nuclear weapons, germs, whatever. And they're just recycling the same old lies over and over again. And I am certain that Obama knows the reality of the nuclear weapons situation in the Middle East, and he proved it during his first press conference as president, when Helen, I'm blanking on her last name, the Lebanese lady, Helen Thomas, said, what countries today in the Middle East have nuclear weapons? And Obama just danced around the story and said, well, we take any nuclear weapons threat as serious and we're keeping that. And of course, the answer to that question was Israel. Israel has nuclear weapons. They've had them all the way back to when they stole their first round of fissionables from the Savannah River plant. And there was the whole Numix scandal that everybody knew about. So Obama knows that Israel has nuclear weapons. He knows that Iraq did not. He knows Iran does not. They're just up there simply saying, if at first you don't succeed, lie again. And again, they seem to be absolutely convinced that you, the American people, are just completely clueless idiots who don't remember all those earlier lies that cost you so much tax money and the lives of your loved ones. And that you're just going to say, yes, Mr. President, tell me what to believe today, and I will believe it.
Yes.
And that's not real world. It's another reason to wonder if Obama is on SSRIs.
That would be scary in the extreme.
Very.
Because we know, and it is documented, how much these chemicals can alter the brain and alter decision-making, the decision-making process. And when you're talking about the President of the United States potentially not quite having his cognitive capabilities in line, this is a really scary thing.
It is a very, very scary thing.
Yeah.
Now, in theory, the President cannot just haul off and launch a nuclear war all by himself. There's something called the two-man rule.
Right.
But what if the second man is also on SSRIs?
Yeah.
Oh, boy, there.
Yes,
Let's
definitely.
see. All righty. We're going to grab a phone call here real quick. Michael in North Carolina. Aloha. Mike, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how are you? Tuning into what you guys were talking about, I was teaching during the second incursion into Iraq, and a bunch of teachers were gathered around, and they were talking about weapons of mass destruction, and I told them that there are none in Iraq.
Yes.
And the guy looked at me, and he says, well, how do you know that? I said, well, that I can't tell you, but there are none. Trust me, they're not there.
Well, I think that the surest proof that they were never there is Saddam didn't use them. The whole point of having nuclear weapons, we are told, is a deterrent to invasion. And so the idea is, if Saddam really had had any of these horrible weapons, he certainly would have used them. Just get this whole picture where you've got the entire military might of the United States has invaded his country, Baghdad's surrounded, he knows they're going to kill him, and all of a sudden he's saying, well, I better not use this anthrax or I'm really going to be in trouble. That's absurd. The fact that Saddam did not deploy any such weapons tells us he never had them.
And one quick thing, and I waited purposely to call when the lovely Lady Claire was in the background. We have you wrote something last week that really it kind of touched me a little bit, because I'm in the same situation as you guys. I'm agnostic. My wife is Presbyterian. Our views on religion could not be further apart.
Right.
But I love my wife, and I respect my wife. My wife loves me, and she respects me. It works.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It can. It does.
I sometimes think all this talk about compatibility, you hear these commercials for the dating services, we'll find somebody who's 100% compatibility with you. I can't think of anything that would be more boring. One of the things I love about my marriage with the lovely Lady Claire here is that we come from very different points in the universe, and we have amazing conversations and discussions, and we're 20 years in, and I'm still learning new things from her, and she's learning new things from me, mostly how to curse creatively when dealing with a busted router. But yeah, it works. And as I've told people before, I don't care if you personally have a religion or not. My issue is with those who are in control of organized religion who are using it for bad purposes. And I will applaud churches who are doing good things like feeding the hungry. But at the same time, that doesn't excuse the actions by, well, like this Baptist minister that we talked about earlier today, who's been having sex with an underage woman. And at least it wasn't a little boy, but he was still having sex with an underage woman. So I don't think there's such a thing as an institution, whether it's governmental or religious, that is entirely above criticism. You applaud the things that they do right, and you are just in criticizing what they're doing wrong. That's the reason for the First Amendment right there.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly on that.
You do?
Yes,
There's
I do.
a shock.
I often say to my wife, did you ever imagine in your life that you would marry an ex-Marine, truck-driving, gun-toting, foul-mouthed individual? Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
I'm sure that I'm not what Claire's dreamed of when she was a little girl.
And one more quick thing, Mike.
Yeah, because we're running out of time. We're at the commercial break. Real quick.
The Dianne Feinstein testimony and that whole thing yesterday, that really scared me.
Oh, yeah, it's completely evasive. Not wanting to deal with it. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back with another phone call. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Back to the phones. Ash in Great Britain. Aloha, Ash. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi there, Mike. How are you doing?
Doing fine.
It's a great show. I really enjoy your show. I used to be Alex Jones' listener, but, there's certain topics you won't touch with a barge pole, but, there's nothing off limits for you, so I really appreciate your courage in that. Mike, the question I've got, the other day you were speaking about how Libya now has got a private central bank.
Yes.
Where did you get the information? Because I've been kind of looking around for that. I've got a lot of Libyan friends, and I told them how they've been conned, and I told them what was going to happen when the war was actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be nice to basically give them this information, because, once these people take over, they basically hide that information.
Well, basically, the reason we know this is when the situation in Libya was just starting to escalate, Gaddafi's opposition, who are now the party that's in power, literally openly proclaimed that the first thing they would do on taking power was authorize the creation of a private central bank. They were basically advertising for support. So they made no bones about the fact that that's what they were going to do, and this was obviously a big part of the agenda there. And if you go back to that article, All Wars Are Banker Wars, it's pretty inescapable at this point that the private central bankers have created a system of enslavement for the human race, and they're trying to basically bring the entire world under it. And as a matter of fact, I think the number of nations that don't have these Rothschild-style private central banks is it's a handful now. And any nation that tries to break away from it, they get attacked. And like I said, 2 years ago, Gaddafi was everybody's buddy, reformed terrorist, doing all kinds of good work for the people and the nation. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden he creates a state central bank and a value-based currency, the gold dinar, and said Libya's oil would be for sale only for the gold dinar. And the rest of the African nations said, we want to start using that as our trade currency because it's obviously much more reliable and trustworthy than the Federal Reserve note. And that right there was the agenda for all of a sudden, we must go into Libya and we must crush him. And they kill Gaddafi in a very brutal manner because apparently the lynching of Saddam Hussein hadn't quite sent the right message to the rest of the world's leaders.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've got lots of friends out there. They're over here studying in the UK and then they go back. One of the problems we face is that the news never really reports about private central banks and that. We really have to scurry around to find any little bits of information. Oh, absolutely the media is never going to report it. The media gets their funding from the banking system. Everybody working, the executives are all getting mortgages from the banking system. The hidden hand of banking, conceals itself. And a lot of people don't even understand how the banking system really works and just how badly it was perverted and mutated by the Federal Reserve Act. Yeah, but that's a challenge. When I talk to them, they say, give me references, give me information. and it's hard to actually give those references to them.
Well, if you go to the top of whatreallyhappened.com, right under my handsome face, there's this little gray box with a lot of little permanent story links, and you'll see a whole bunch of them. The 11th Marble, Slave to the Bankers, Mortgage Fraud for Dummies, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, Fatal Flaws in Wall Street, the Fed Ponzi Scheme, and so forth. And if you go through them, there's a lot of sources and a lot of references. Okay?
Okay. One last thing, if I may, yeah?
Yes.
You know, when people look at Islam, I'm a Muslim myself, got a lot of good Christian friends, and, you know, realize that what's happening, we've got to rise above our divisions in faith. But one thing that people always look at is, when they look at Muslims, they look at Saudi Arabia. And I just want to make the point that the Saudi royal family was installed by the British. They do not represent Islam. In fact, the Prophet Muhammad actually warned that, basically said the horns of the devil will rise from what today is modern-day Riyadh, where the royal family rises from. So, you know, they've created these dummies, yeah. So if a person thinks the Islamic banking system, that's good, and immediately the next thing they think is, Saudis don't allow women to drive. So they're trying to con people on the trivia, whereas in Islam, this says the interest has 60 branches, and the smallest one of which is like committing adultery with your own mother, yeah? What they're trying to do is normalize it through the back door, like using their proxies in the Arab world, especially United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia.
Well, again, you know something, my attitude is it's their country, let the people decide. But you're absolutely right. Most of the so-called ruling powers in the Middle East were installed by Britain and the United States, starting with the end of World War II. And obviously, as certain governments broke free from American-British control, those rulers were basically kicked out, and a new puppet was put in. The classic case, of course, being Iran, which elected Mohammad Mossadegh to power, and Mohammad Mossadegh said, we're going to sell Iran's oil at the prevailing market rate, no more discounts. So the CIA comes in, and they overthrow him, and they install the Shah, who allows British and American oil companies to become insanely rich on Iranian oil, while the Iranian people were basically crushed down into abject poverty. Until 1979, when the Iranian people said, we've had it with this, they kicked out the Shah, they formed their own new government, and ever since then the United States has been trying to find a way to invade them, because by golly, once you're a puppet state of the United States, you stay that way. You don't dare break free. Same reason they had the Hots for Castro all those years. They had a U.S. puppet in charge of Cuba, Batista, who made American corporations rich, led to the revolution, and U.S. has been sneering at Cuba ever since. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And during the break, one of our listeners sent in a link to one of the stories about the creation of a Libyan central bank. This is over at the economiccollapseblog.com, and I've just posted it to What Really Happened as a flashback. The headline reads, wow, that was fast. Libyan rebels have already established a new central bank of Libya. And it basically says they're in the middle of this life and death conflict, and somehow the Libyan rebels had enough time to establish a new private central bank of Libya, and so forth. So that'll be available as soon as the cash clears out on that one. We have a caller on the line, Bill in New York. Aloha, Bill. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Great show. I have a quick question for you regarding banking and accounts. I'd like to have your opinion on the safety of accounts in brokerage houses, for example, Wells Fargo, versus banks. I know that you shy away from keeping your money in a bank, but if you wanted to enter the stock market... If I had any. Right. Yeah.
You know, I'm rich. I got $100 trillion here right now from the Bank of Zimbabwe.
Welcome to the club. But anyway, let's say you wanted to take advantage of the coming crash. If there is going to be a coming crash and if stocks go way down, you have to have your money in an account. But how safe is a Wells Fargo account versus a bank account, in your opinion?
Well, that is a very complicated issue, and it goes back to the Glass-Steagall Act that was passed in the wake of the stock market crash of 1929. Because what was going on under Glass-Steagall, it was illegal for companies that included both depositor banks and investment groups to use depositors' money for those investment activities. Investment groups, it's very high-risk activity. And normally with investment banking, the partners are putting their own money in and are willing to accept that risk. Back during the 1920s, the lines got blurred, and financial institutions that had depositor banks as well as investment groups started playing fast and loose with the depositors' money, and that's what led to all the bank failures following the crash. So Glass-Steagall separated them and said you can be a depositor bank or you can be an investment group. You cannot be both. So then we get to 1998, I think it was, when the Travelers Group merged with Citibank and formed the Citigroup. And it was in violation of Glass-Steagall. And instead of going over to this new group and say, sorry, this is illegal, you've got to split back up, Congress passed a Financial Reform Act that was loosely named the Citigroup Relief Act that repealed basically Glass-Steagall, and that triggered all of these mergers of all these depositor banks that had lots of customer cash with these investment groups, and they went on this wild spree of blue sky investing. Now, how that applies to today, if you're talking about keeping your money safe, you want to find a small bank that is not directly involved in this kind of investment group speculation activity.
Or a credit union.
Or a credit union.
Yeah.
The most risk is going to be with these large money center banks that have deposit banks and investment brokerages happening basically under the same business roof. But in the end, because a large stock market crash will probably trigger losses virtually in every investment, including the AAAs, you could probably see losses even in these small isolated business banks. Now, out here in Hawaii, we've been pretty lucky because of the Japanese real estate crash back in the 1990s. Most of our local banks didn't get caught up in this whole mortgage-backed security fraud, and they sort of came through it pretty much unscathed. But again, you know, the money has to come in. It has to be invested someplace, and if the entire economy takes a kneecapping, the bank that you're in may not be as much of a factor. Again, I really think if you have any surplus money right now, you should have it out of the bank and keep some of it as cash on hand in case the ATMs lock up. And you should be looking at silver and gold, especially right now, because if this story coming out of Great Britain, where Barclays and the rest of the banks that were involved in LIBOR were also playing games with the gold and silver fix, the moment they are forced to stop doing that by public awareness and legal action, we're going to see gold and silver really take off.
Would you, hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Would you trust brokerage houses such as Wells Fargo? And the reason why I ask that is because if you don't put any money in there and say stocks do collapse and you do want to purchase them, how do you do it if you don't have an account?
Well, you can go through a brokerage. There are small brokerages, just like there are small banks in every town. As far as trusting Wells Fargo, I wouldn't. All of these banks have been caught in these criminal violations of the law. The fact that they're not being arrested and prosecuted doesn't make it any less egregious. I really wouldn't trust any of them right now, knowing what I know from the last few years of history. But if you really feel that you want to purchase stocks at the bottom of the downturn, and I know a lot of people will want to, I'm sure there are brokerages in your own home where you can just go in and open an account and just buy the stocks right there. Or you can do one of the online e-traders. Just understand that there are probably going to be more than one crash. And that was also the pattern in 1929. Everyone talks about Black Thursday in October, and they forget that there was a smaller crash in August that wiped out a lot of fortunes. And then it started back up, and everybody said, oh, crisis is over, and they started buying back in. And then when the big crash happened in October, they got wiped out. So you need to be careful. At this point, I've never really been in the stock market myself, and I don't claim to be a real expert about it, but my gut instincts are telling me that now is not a time to be in there, and I know that a lot of independent small investors have already left the stock market, despite the run-up of the Dow, because they understand it's illusion, it's fraud. It's a very heavily overvalued market. It is more overvalued than it was in 1929, and that means it's got a long way to go when the final crash comes.
Thanks, Mike. Enjoy your weekend.
All right, thanks an awful lot.
Right,
okay,
bye-bye.
Lady Love, what is next on your list of things to have fun with?
Well, normally this is something in which I would not dabble, but sometimes one has to see what is behind certain choices and certain decision-making organizations. And there is a big headline: Miss Israel and Obama are going to have dinner in Jerusalem.
That's got to be making Michelle very nervous, since she's not going on this trip.
She is the picture is of a very beautiful Ethiopian-born
I
Jewish
presume
woman.
you're not talking about Michelle at this point.
No.
Yes. Okay.
Miss Israel, Yetish Aina, has been invited to dine with the president and 120 other guests when Obama visits Israel next week. And she's 22 years old. For a guy, I am sure that she is not hard on the eyes, and, God bless her. But...
Well, he's the president. He deserves the best honey trap that money can buy. And
however, semicolon coming, I am quite sure that at least one of the reasons this young woman was chosen for this title has very much to do with the Israeli government's wanting to distance itself from the recent debacle over their doctors and nurses sterilizing Ethiopian-born Jews with Depo-Provera, a very long-lasting birth control medication, which has caused reproduction rates to plummet in the Ethiopian Jewish community in Israel.
And, of course, this was all done without the Ethiopians' knowledge.
No.
It was let's use the word, genocide.
Yeah.
It was an attempt to sterilize this quote-unquote undesirable segment of the population. And, again, that's one of the things the Nazis were accused of doing.
Well,
we don't want the gypsies. We don't want to find ways to sterilize them, you know.
And as a woman, about birth control, I get it, I understand, and that should be the right of every woman working with her healthcare professional to make enlightened decisions for her own situation. But, I mean, some of these young women were told, unless you take the injections, you can't immigrate, you can't make aliyah, you can't come over. And this injection is not a commonly prescribed means of contraception. It is considered a last resort and is usually given to women who are institutionalized or developmentally disabled. And yet, according to an investigation recently aired on an Israeli documentary show called Vacuum by Gal Gabay, it has been given to at least 40 Ethiopian Jewish women that we know of. And what is interesting is that to American conservatives who do pledge much of their fealty to Israel, sometimes in advance of the fealty that they pledge to the people they allegedly represent, these people are really looking the other way now that Israel is adopting a eugenics program similar to those of Planned Parenthood's Margaret Sanger. Wow.
Well, you need to understand, there are a lot of negative press about the Nazis' eugenics program, race hygiene, and so forth. But most schools don't teach that Hitler got his ideas about racial cleansing from the American eugenics movement of the 1930s. Mm-hmm. In the 1930s, we were seeing exactly that same kind of stuff here in the United States of America, that undesirable women should be forcibly sterilized by the state. A lot of that went on. And they were talking about allowing only the better genes to breed. And, of course, we used to see the same thing back in medieval Europe. Mm-hmm. That was the whole idea of royalty, was breeding the best. And, of course, it resulted in a lot of inbreeding, from which you got situations like Richard III. And it's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. Mm-hmm. Anybody who understands the industry of the pet supply company, when you get too much inbreeding, you mm-hmm. get a very weak animal. And the healthiest dogs you're going to get are the poi dogs. That's the Hawaiian word for a mixed breed, a mutt. That's 5 or 6 different breeds in its parentage. They mm-hmm. call them poi dogs. And they're the healthiest and happiest ones you can find. And so this idea of racial hygiene, again, what Israel was doing was without the permission of these Ethiopian women. They were told they had to have the shot. They were not told what the shot was going to do.
Yeah, it was it was, and I think it still is, sort of an ongoing mess.
Okay, anything else you got?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. Monsanto. Yes.
The company we all love to hate.
Yes, the company that keeps
almost
on
as
giving.
much as Belkin.
Yeah. There is a new Monsanto Protection Act floating through the Senate, and it's going to be acted upon, we think, as early as next week. And Monsanto is, again, at war against health-conscious consumers, with the latest Monsanto Protection Act managing to sneak wording into the latest Senate legislation that would give them blanket immunity. Let me back up and say that again. Blanket immunity from any USDA action regarding the potential dangers of their genetically modified creations while under review. The USDA would be unable to act against any and all new GMO crops that were suspected of wreaking havoc on either human health or the environment. Now, this legislation could be passed as early as next week. And what needs to happen is that senators need to hear from their constituents that they want the Monsanto Protection Act eliminated from the Farmers Assurance provision.
Let me tell you what I think is going on here. We understand that the current militarism around the world is all about returning to Bretton Woods, to force the world to be dependent on the U.S. dollar. And I'm beginning to wonder if the reason there is so much willingness by our government to protect Monsanto, even as more and more evidence surfaces about the danger and harm of these GMO crops, is because they're hoping that the world will become dependent on American seed. Because remember, once you're using these Monsanto seeds, you have to keep coming back and buying more seeds.
Yeah.
And it would take 3 years of letting your fields lie unused in order to go back to the natural varieties of crops. And we're starting to see situations where the natural varieties of crops are being tainted and contaminated by these Monsanto genes.
Yes.
And I think the idea is make the world dependent on the U.S. dollar and make the world dependent on U.S.-supplied food production, and nobody will dare stand up against the empire.
Yeah, it's dollarification and seedification, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take another phone call. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome back. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Claire? How you doing, Mike?
We're good.
Sorry,
How
Mike.
are you doing?
Well, you know, the thing is, I watched this film. It's called Black Genocide.
Yes.
And it was talking about the very things you were talking about. It was talking after the blacks were freed as slaves, these corporations who benefited off slavery, they had to find out a way to get rid of them. And it all revolves around eugenics and the abortion industry. I mean, it's a very good film, documentary.
All right, we'll take a look at that.
Yeah.
And also, you know, talk about Monsanto. I know it's like on the Sci-Fi Channel and all these channels. Monsanto is doing a big PR thing and saying, we eat the food, we're your families, we're your community, we're Monsanto.
Oh, but
like,
no, and I will tell you, in the cafeteria at their corporate office, no GMO food is served.
Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
I know, but they're trying to go to the dumbed-down crowd, like to watch the sci-fi.
I don't think the dumbed-down crowd is as dumbed down as they think anymore.
No.
I mean, again, what I was talking about earlier, the propagandists are still acting like they're convinced we're buying this bovine excrement, and we're not. And so they're very much out of touch with the reality out here. I don't think we're anywhere near as dumbed down as they hope we are.
Well, I could just see, like, the bankers and this big corporate elitism. I think it's all getting ready to crash down because they are so spread thin that they don't have the military or the might anymore.
No, they don't.
Or the money or the manufacturing.
It's an exhausted nation right now.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you, Krill. Thank you, Mike. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Okay. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, I think that, well, just one more.
Okay.
Just one more thing. Apparently, last month, a 3-year-long federal prosecution of Blackwater collapsed. The government's 15 felony indictment on such charges as conspiring to hide purchases of automatic rifles and other weapons from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives could have led to years of jail time for Blackwater personnel. In the end, however, the government only had misdemeanor guilty pleas from 2 former executives, each of whom were sentenced to 4 months of house arrest, 3 years probation, and a fine of $5,000. And apparently, during the time of the invasion and occupation of Iraq, Blackwater was working as a virtual extension of the CIA. There were no boundaries. There were no lines.
It's the Menendez defense.
Yeah, and
all over again.
Yeah, and the lines were so completely blurred between the CIA and a for-profit private militia. It was really bad.
Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm watching on the corporate media, and they're spending a lot of time on this story about the celebrity hack attacks, where those evil computer hackers have broken into the personal information of celebrities like Hulk Hogan and Michelle Obama, and they've put it up on a website for everybody to look at. Horror of horrors. Now, first of all, I think this is a fraud. For the very simple reason, from the point of view of the hackers who have perpetrated this stunt, what does it get them other than the headlines? They're not going to make money off of this. This is all about attracting attention to a new crisis the government will deal with. And the government can't deal with this. I mean, the FBI is up there saying, yes, we're going to track down these hackers and blah, blah, blah. The FBI can't even track down the people who are sending around this ransomware pretending to be from the FBI. They can't find them. So this idea that they're going to catch these hacking criminals, I think we are being prepared for a virtual 911, a false flag attack. At the point when they cannot prop up the stock market and Wall Street any longer, the U.S. will bring down the computers of the financial centers and blame Iran, China, Russia, Al-Qaeda,
the usual suspects
for the thing, and just say, those dastardly, we were just on the verge of turning the economy around. It was going to be a golden age, and we'll be off to another war. Because they're desperate. They're desperate to get this war escalated as a distraction from the financial mismanagement. And they're certainly desperate to duck the blame and responsibility for having gotten us into this mess. Wall Street crimes and corruptions and government complicity. If this all falls apart and they don't have somebody to blame on it or a good war to distract us from it, we, the American people, are going to stand up and say, we know who did this. And it wasn't Al-Qaeda. And it wasn't hackers. It was Wall Street money junkies aided and abetted with malice aforethought by the United States federal government. And we're going to point the finger of blame right there. Somebody was saying the other day that the Tea Party is like the American Revolution and Occupy Wall Street is like the French Revolution. It may well turn out that way. And it's a footnote you need to remember from the French Revolution. Before Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette visited Madame Guillotine, the bankers went. It's not just a coincidence. The French Revolution knew who it was that was impoverishing the nation for the benefit of the rich. And so they're in a panic. If this falls apart, and they don't actually have the military force to protect their lives against the enraged American people, it's going to be a very uncomfortable time. Anyways, I mentioned earlier in the show the former pastor of the First Baptist Church of Hammond, Dr. Jack Schopp, has had to plead guilty taking an underage girl to Illinois and Michigan for a sexual relationship. Apparently he told this girl that their affair was not morally wrong, and actually Jesus Christ wanted her to have sex with him. And shame on this pastor for saying that.
Yes.
And shame on this girl for believing such a wild fairy tale. That's it for our show. We're heading out here for Pauhana Friday. We'll be back Monday here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay informed, make good choices, ignore belief. It is your enemy, as much so as the bankers. And aloha, America.